briefly introduce, and I would leave you to speak more on Ashish Nandi. I think I have kind of explained why I divided the readings in the way I did. So, if we are talking about how the division of science, religion, the world, the immanent world, and the transcendent reality came about, and how nature and science and this world became so separated and got applied through Nehru and in post-colonial India as as a pure spirit of science. That's something Pratik was pointing to. That science is not something as secular knowledge, but very elevated secular knowledge, right? That is the idea. And we, if you remember, we used to call the natural sciences pure science. Physics, chemistry. We still have that idea of pure science. What I had begun with saying that novel as a pure form of literature, which is just aesthetic. And what I mentioned about Ramayana yesterday, if you look at least the ones who work on Sanskrit literature now, that's their idea. That Ramayana is the ideal kavya. What makes a language like a literary language? Its kavya is the epitome of any language, and the Ramayana is the ideal kavya, and hence it should not be used for any other purposes. And we can see, how we've completely forgotten that notion of the pure kavya, which is, very much the idea of the novel as something and as an aesthetic kind of experience that gives you. Okay, so Talal Asad, again, I'll try and be brief. As I said in the last session, his idea is that it is impossible to construct a universal definition of religion. But that is what anthropology as a discipline in modern times has done. So, as he says it himself, do not think that he's doing this just to attack Clifford Geertz. In fact, he's saying that he's doing this because he thinks of Clifford Geertz as one of the best examples of anthropologists. And as we know, many of us know, Clifford Geertz was extremely influential. He's produced an entire generation of anthropologists from Chicago. I mean, think of the good, very many, Anne Gold, Gloria Raheja. Before that, Nicholas Dirks, and even earlier ones, whom I can't recall right now, but he was at Chicago for several years, extremely influential. And he, in fact, gave the idea of culture, the centrality in many ways. It was only later, and as a tribute to him, there's a book that came out which is called After Culture, right? And it is a tribute to Geertz. There were obviously criticisms or problems with his work later, but the fact is he was very highly regarded and also very, very influential. I don't know, some of you must have read his works on the Balinese cockfight and his idea of thick description. Oh, the other person was thoroughly influenced by by Geertz was Arjunappa Durai. His first book, Worship and Conflict Under Colonial Rule, he is saying precisely that he's looking at temples to offer a thick description of it, right? So we have to keep this in mind. So Asad is not, his point is not to attack Clifford Geertz. His point is to show that even the best, function with certain abstract universal principles, come to construct, not only function, they construct certain abstract universal principles to define religion, and how that is not tenable. So let's get that clear at the beginning. It's not, as he says very clearly, that if his intention was to just attack Clifford Geertz, he would have taken into account his very wide range of scholarship. Why is he just picking on one essay in one book, right? One volume, The Interpretation of Cultures. One, because it had a great influence. And two, as he thinks that the way he frames it, it seems so subtle and so, kind of well done that it's something that you can work with. and yet the problems if you were to start on that premise. So, what is most critical argument against this kind of separation of religion as a universal category? Because once you make it a universal category, it's not just, the problem is not that it applies differently in different societies. The point is, it does not hold even as a universal category because it necessarily has to be context specific and historical. So what's his crucial point? That this idea of religion as something which has an essence of its own separates it from power completely. You see, which is not true. And that's why I'm relating it to even our, Hindu temples. There's this huge debate among scholars of ancient India as to, and Dumo kind of tries to resolve it, who is above the other, right? Is it the Brahman or is it the Raja? And Brahman not just as a priest, Brahman also as the teacher, as the preceptor, or is it the Raja? So it's the same idea. These were completely joined. So the important implication of Talal Asad's work is that he's pointing to the fact that religion and power have always been together. So we have seen in the last session as to how this, through immanence, transcendence, and the nature of man, they come to be separated. But he's saying that there's a problem in accepting that, religion is something transcendental and therefore has a sense of its own and it's got nothing to do with power. While it has always had and will always have something to do with power in that sense. Our kingship, if you think about it, till very late, and that's Nicholas Dirk, Gloria Raheja, and many others. We also work, my own work of Jagannath. It is, we don't call it divine kingship, but it is what? It is always sanctioned by some god or the other.
Their thinking is an aspect of the divine.
Yes, also that. I mean, what is the Raja of Puri? Chalanti Vishnu. Why? Because he is the Adya Sevak, the first servant of Lord Jagannath. So, kingship, forget about just what happened in Europe, has always been ritually constituted. And if we forget that aspect and turn to now, you can never separate religion and power because they are completely imbricated, they're mutually imbricated, and that is his point. The idea that religion is something spiritual, separate, no, it doesn't. The starting premise is wrong, and hence his problem with Clifford Geertz, the way he's formulating this universal definition of religion. So he's saying part of his basic argument is that socially identifiable forms, preconditions, and effects of what was regarded as religion in the medieval Christian church were quite different from those considered so in modern society. The way Clifford Geertz, if you remember that definition, I'll not repeat it because he's taking it step by step. Talal Asad is pointing to the very basic elements, system of meanings. It's extremely, how should I say, appealing. System of meanings. I once taught a course, I remember, a gender studies thing, and we did Geertz and we did Talal Asad, and there was a student who was actually a student of law from another, and she was considered to be extremely difficult by all her, fellow students, and she said that, this idea of web of meanings got me so completely fascinated that through the entire course, all she could do was to think about Geertz and think description in all that she did or read. So it's extremely appealing, and that's the point. It's a very elegant formulation, both of culture and of religion as a part of culture. System of meanings. It sounds like so appealing. It's a system of meanings. It's a system of symbols. When you're talking about cultural roots, we all think, it's as if common sense that we naturally belong because we share all this. So what is Asad's point there? Yes, we do share, and no, we don't share, in the sense that the way, let's say, even my parents' generation, we don't have to go back very far, I say medieval Christianity, parents' generation thought and felt and understood, certain rituals, certain symbols, certain ways of life as being, let's say, Hindu, is not the way we necessarily do. Even if we follow the same rituals, let's say, that is his point. It is historically specific in the sense it's conditional upon several other processes, right? Which impact upon the way you think, even when you think that religion is your way of life. And that's what come to my problem with Nandi there. This clear separation of religion as faith and religion as ideology is the same thing. You're marking out faith as this, noble domain of religion, which remains unchanged, and not just unchanged, which can never affect anyone who believes in religion as faith. And my moot question, I'm preempting a bit there, is then why is it that many people who actually subscribe to religion as faith also, stride to religion as ideology? Not all, but many, right? So this tells you that, this clear separation does not hold. So Talal Asad's point is that the moment you try and construct a universal definition of religion, you impute to it an essence. When we say essentialized categories, you impute to it an essence which you think is trans-historical, trans-cultural, right? And unchanging through the centuries and applicable to all societies. And that is something our work on religion has told us again and again. We all started with guilds. It's not as if there's any getting away from guilds. As I said, it's extremely influential, it's extremely appealing. But precisely because of that, why is it, let's say, when I went to work on Mohima Dharma, my first work was actually on Mohima Dharma, right? Not on Jagannath. I moved from the periphery to the center, to Jagannath. I had to ask myself that within Orissa, why is it that these people do not, believe or have faith or have, trust in Lord Jagannath in the way most Oriyas are meant to do, because he is the Rashtra Devata and has been the Rashtra Devata for centuries. And then when I went back to the history of the Jagannath temple, I found that obviously it was Chodaganga and then the Gangas of the south who were actually worshippers of Lord Shiva. So what were the reasons behind one Ganga king constructing and dedicating a temple to, then he was Purushottam Jagannath, he becomes Jagannath later, because there's an entire process through which Jagannath, who's meant to be a Shavar Devata, gets transformed into not only Purushottam Jagannath, but also Buddha Jagannath. So when Talal Asad is saying that there are constant changes and configurations very different, it's only in Orissa and certain other regions close by. Even if you look at the Kumpul Chatterjee has his brilliant works on the Ganjifa cards, and when they get these are Mughal cards, but how they get, the iconography changes in different local codes of India. It's Buddha and Jagannath. If you think of our Dashavatar, there is no Jagannath there. It's only in Orissa that the ninth avatar is Buddha Jagannath, because you cannot, completely displace Buddha, right? So he is Buddha Jagannath and Prabuddha, Buddha in the sense of Prabuddha. So there is a displacement, changing the meaning, right? So this tells you what he's talking about. There cannot be universal definitions, and as I said, it's clear in our own experience. And I had to ask myself when I began work with with Moima Dharma, because as you know, Jagannath is so important. I mean, it's insisted again and again, emphasized again and again. You go anywhere in Orissa, particularly Bhubaneswar in the coastal regions, that Lord Jagannath is the Lord of all, etc. So I had to ask myself, why is it that these people, very marginal people, do not relate to or identify with Jagannath, even if we think that there's immanence and transcendence together. And one important point that Ashish Nandi makes, I like it the way he puts it. He says that faith is something that's meant to give you shelter, and ideology, when it becomes ideology, is something that you have to protect and fight for. So if we take it in the idea of faith as something transcendent, that gives you shelter from many things that you think are not within your control. Let's say we are not modern human beings, and we do not think that we stand alone with our own powers and we can settle everything in life. So why is it that in spite of this tremendous and powerful presence of Lord Jagannath as the Lord of all, supported by the state, you can see the Rashtra Devata? What does it mean? Do I have to say that religion and politics are absolutely imbricated? Rashtra Devata. So why is it that a group of extremely marginal men and women did not think that they could not trust or place their faith in Jagannath? So these were the questions I had to come up with, and it was in a roundabout way that I came to Talala Sadh. Right? I started with not just beards. I had to read a lot more, history, a lot more on Indian, people who have worked on Indian religions, and then suddenly Talala Sadh seemed to make sense, total sense, when he's saying that the way you relate to one, even if forget about this, problematic relationship between Jagannath and Moima Dharma or several other, all these, radical cults, let's say, where sects, let's say. Now they are sects, they weren't, because they're also calling it a dharma. That's a different matter we could talk about later, why they're calling it a dharma, it's a new dharma, right? But we can talk about it later. But why is it that there are many, not just one? Why is it that there are many that are coming up in the 19th century? And many of them, at least the followers, it's not that the preceptors are openly saying that I am the avatar who's come to rid the world of sin. But many of them are looked upon by their followers as these avatars, like the 10th avatar, the Kalki avatar, not necessarily Kalki, but the avatar who's yet to appear to rid the world of sin and to set, Satya Dharma. So Mahima Dharma, when it gets institutionalized and histories are written, it is Satya Mahima Dharma. So there's permutation, combination within a very small group over a course of 150 years that I have followed, or 200 years that I have followed. That's a separate question. But Talala Sadh makes sense because, as I said, let's forget this tense relationship between the Jagannath cult and Moima Dharma. Let's ask, when you are devotees of Jagannath, is it the same way you relate to him? No. And that's what Talala Sadh is trying to say. That even when we place our trust and faith and think upon him, on him as someone who will, protect us from things not within our control, it's not the same way you identify or relate. So you cannot have, therefore, rituals, symbols, where the meanings are given forever. So that's what he is pointing to. So just the persistence, let's say, of certain doctrines, certain symbols, certain rituals that have continued through the centuries. We can also say we go to temple, we don't go to temple, right? So these are rituals which can tell you that we are Hindus, we are not Hindus, whatever. The meanings change constantly. So he's saying you cannot have, therefore, this idea of a religion as something spiritual and separate, which is given for all time to come, and to which the people who adhere in exactly the same way. And the meanings change not just on account of how we think of religion. The meanings change also on account of several other processes happening around you. And hence he's saying it is both historical and it's also permeated by power. We often forget. The idea is, as I said, religion as this domain of the purely, like pure science, purely religious, purely spiritual, purely elevated. He's saying it's very much of this world, because it's, as philosophers have said, my father was the first student actually of Professor J.N. Mohanty. Jitendranath Mohanty, the very well-known professor. He, in a much later talk at the Ramakrishna Mission, he said, why do we think that, reason and religion are so different? Religion is a part of man's reason. What else is it? So why do we think that reason is something, this idea of something pure, something scientific, something. So who has, who believes in, who has created religion? It is another part of man's reason that has produced faith, religion. What else is it? So why do we think of it as something completely separate? And I was struck. I mean, there's always so much to learn from him. But when he said it and put it like in his usual gentle way, because people were talking about spiritual, and he says, spiritual has come to acquire the meaning that you have given to us now. And in Bangla, I explained, spiritual is not adhyatmic. Spiritual can also be something, dear, noble, etc., etc. Not adhyatmic in the sense of something of transcendence. You were saying the same thing, that it's very much a part of this world, and we go back to this this combination of immanence and transcendence. Because the moment we say it's adhyatmic, we think it's not of this world. And I was, as I said, I was so pleasantly surprised to hear Professor J.N. Mohanty put it, in such clear terms. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to say. For me, the major implications of Lala Lasad's work, because he makes you think. And once I thought, as I said, I realized that why is it that a Ganga king, declares, not only builds a temple, its successor declares it to be the domain of Lord Jagannath, while at home, why at home? I mean, most of them were worshippers of Shiva. And this leads me to another point of how, there are constant changes. Again, my knowledge only of the history of Orissa, but it is true because other scholars have confirmed this, that Shiva and the Shakti traditions were much older. And with the rise and prominence of Vishnu worship, there's a displacement, there's a reshuffling within the divine hierarchy. Right? Jagannath, we say Jagannath is supreme, who is the Adhishthatri Devi of the Puri temple, Vimala. Devi Vimala. And it is only after, many of you maybe do not know, it's only after the bhog that is offered to Jagannath or Jagannath is sent to Vimala's temple and comes back from there. After that, it becomes, it's praised by Jagannath and becomes the Mahaprasad. We don't know this. So it's not as if, Vimala has disappeared completely. And even now, on just one night of a year, even now within what is thought to be a totally Vaishnav temple now, there is good sacrifice. Unless, as I said, I haven't followed it over the last few years. Maybe it has changed now. I don't know it. But the last time I asked, it was still there. No one can enter. It's done at the dead of night and through the western gate, of course, not through the you don't enter through the main lion gate and all that. So what am I pointing to? That these changes and the ambiguities remain, and it depends on you how you relate to it. When I went back to find out more about the Devis, because I was also interested in the social implications of this reshuffling. What happens when within the divine hierarchy the goddesses are being kind of pushed away, right? So what are the social implications when one male god comes up as the supreme god, reigning also over Shiva. So I was also interested in that, those connections, not just, why the change in the divine hierarchy, right? And the same Panda, who was a much younger guy when I was working on Jagannath in Puri, I'd go back again and again, take me around everywhere, and he'll tell all the other inmates. I think it was the Balananda Tirthashram or someone, because some relatives of us knew, and that's where I'd go and stay. It was meant to be safe for me to go back again and again and stay there. So you tell all the others, no, you have to be like Didi to be a true devotee of Jagannath. And I always ask myself, am I, really a devotee? He said, no, she watches all the rituals. Do you have her kind of patience and staying up nights and getting up? No. That same Panda, whom I thankfully found several years later when I went back, he did whatever I asked him to do. He took me to someone who knew about the, the goddesses and the influence. But before I left, I was telling someone yesterday, he takes me to his house which he has built. And as you enter, there's just stairs going up. There's nothing on the ground floor, but a huge image of Jagannath. And before I leave, he takes me there and he says, no more karo, no, like you have to do pranam. And Lord Jagannath is supreme. Didi, I don't understand why you are now interested in the goddesses. Okay. And I said, Kanu, who remains your Ishto Devata? That's the other thing we do not know. It's a Devi. For all the Pandas, you check, starting from the Adya Seva, the Raja of Puri, his Ishta Devi is Kanaka Durga. And for all the other Pandas, it's some form of Durga or Chandi. So since people have asked me to speak on my own work on Orissa, but as I said, you see why, Talal Asad made sense for me and continues to make sense for me through all these years that I've worked on, religion in some way or the other. But he now, as I said, the Kanu Panda has changed. He was not happy. The same Kanu would tell everyone, here's this Didi from Kolkata, who he thought was dripping with devotion, and but he helped me enormously. Because without him, I wouldn't have had access to the number of, older Pandas to talk to. The priest even took me to the earlier Rajguru. He showed me the bahis of several Pandas, right? And he would take me around on his scooter everywhere. So people were quite surprised that who's this Panda going around with this woman, young woman from Calcutta. So that same Kanu was not happy because of the way, this idea of not just Lord Jagannath as supreme, but Lord Jagannath as the center of a kind of cultural identity Orissa has consciously constructed. So as I said, he did take me to someone, he did tell me, but he didn't want to. He said, why do you want to know who my Ishto Devata is? I said, I'm just curious, And then he had to say, and it was not even Durga, it was like more, closer to a Tantric Devi, which is why he was wrong. Yes. He said, no, but they are not important. It's all important is Lord Jagannath. Again, you see the play of power in different ways coming true in real lives. So what happens with the rise of Vaishnavism in a very strong way, there is a displacement. Both of you, who's meant to be a much older god, as you know, some people say that his connection comes down from the Harappan age, and the goddess worship. When we speak of connected histories or shared histories, this entire region, something I've mentioned, from the Nepal Tarai down to Puri in Orissa, down to the sea, so Kachar, all this entire region. Tripura, Bengal, Bangladesh, parts of Bangladesh, even parts of Bihar, but I don't know the history of Bihar that well. Of course, we have Kamakhya Devi, there's no entire region was extremely, extremely important for Shakti worship in all its different forms. Shakti combined with certain forms of Buddhism later, or these are the permutations, combinations, and certain forms of what? Even Vaishnavism, certain forms, of course, now we call them degenerate, the Shahajiyas and many other groups like that, and Tantra.
what is the connection between Lord Jagannath and temple authority? I wish you elaborate on that.
Lord Jagannath and temple authority. The Raja dedicates the temple to him, and
sacred geography around that. With the king is the best today.
but that's true of all temples. If you look at histories of temples in the south, and as you know, the temples in the south were, more important. All anthropology scholars or Indologists who came to India interested in temples went first to the south. Even Professor Pulke moved from Chidambaram and then to Orissa. His first work is on the Chidambaram temple. So the Raja dedicates, as I said, it's not only ritually constructed kingship. The Raja is saying, later Rajas are saying that, since he is the prime, not just the first, Adya in the sense of prime servitor of Lord Jagannath, some are claiming that he is the Rauta, viceroy, some are claiming they are putras of Lord Jagannath. So some are saying that since we are putras of Lord Jagannath, you see the relation of God, Christ, man, nature reflected here. So it's not, that, we can't say that while we're reading about Christianity. That's what I said. Sorry? Yes, exactly. So these are the inputs I would want from you, because, from this region, much more. I've always been interested in Assam and not really been able to work on Assam. So the point is, they're saying that if you revolt against us, it will be considered as droha against Jagannath. It's clear in some. Again, and why are they saying it? Because of certain circumstances. And from there, Professor Pulke talks about his theory, he develops his theory of legitimation. He thinks that the kings, ruled in the name of the gods or goddesses in order to get, this kind of legitimation for their own rule. The divine geography is actually different. Once the Vishnu worship comes into force, the sacred geography is not really connected to the Raja or the king. But once the Jagannath becomes so important in Orissa, Puri becomes, and especially after Chaitanya's move to Puri, what happens is it's not Jagannath anymore. It gets connected with the sacred geography of the Vaishnava network. So it is from Puri, therefore lies in between, interestingly, but those are the Vaishnavas, not the Jagannath worshippers of Orissa. And let me tell you, if you read books on Vaishnavism, any books in Orissa on Vaishnavism, they are very clear to mark out their difference, with Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's Gaudiya Vaishnavism is purer, and it's more like an Advaitic concept, whereas Gaudiya Vaishnavism is about love and effusion and etc. etc. So I'm speaking of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and how it gets connected. Puri lies midway between Navadvip and Vrindavan. And the wider circle, which is not has got nothing to do with the Vaishnava circle of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. In the wider circle, something I mentioned, the 4 dhams of Lord Vishnu. Puri is obviously meant to be the eastern one, more or less located in the 4 extremities. Not exactly, but the 4 extremities. And that's what I was saying. This idea of India, in some sense, as a bounded kind of territory or whatever, I don't know how people related to this notion, was held together by natural frontiers. The Himalayas in the north, and then in the south, obviously, we have the sea, it's a peninsula. But we do not know. It's extremely difficult for us now to try and understood how people, who took one, very few people could do all the 4, but the ones who did, but they were aware that they existed. There were many others who couldn't do it, but they were aware that this sacred network existed, because they would speak of it, the 4 dhams, right? So that would be a fascinating history to try and recover. What was their sense of, belonging? What was their sense of, being in a country, being in a land, being in a sacred land? So was it necessarily, that's what I was asking you, was it necessarily the idea of India as a nation state we think of? No. Maybe it was the domain of the Lord, or in a different sense. We have to ask these questions.
I find it the way you are narrating this. I find it so very interesting and engaging from the very beginning of your discourse. But then there are two, uh, especially responding to what you have just said. During the medieval period, later medieval period, it is Adi Shankaracharya who has re-emphasized uh, re-emphasized the significance of the Lingam Tirthas and these not that much about the Shakti Pithas, but then these the Vaishnava Tirthas to go back or hark back to unified idea of this continent, which of course as I'm saying, I want to just put it idea. I'm not readily subscribing to those notions, but these are ideas which always fascinates you, or rather wants you to explore more. This is number one. Number two, uh, I'm again, I have totally appreciated the way you have emphasized or you have brought in the notion of Puri Jagannatha and expounded about its social significance. But then you are aware, I'm too sure about that. Just beside Puri, in Bhubaneswara, there is this
Of course, Lingaraj.
Lingaraj, which talks, which is a proof about the confrontation and the confluence of the Vaishnavas and the Shaivas during the late medieval period, when there was this sectarian predominance. You know, which sect was more powerful than the other. As you have already understood what I mean, so would you elaborate more on the significance of the what is that temple in Bhubaneswar? The Lingaraja. The Lingaraja, relating to this importance or the significance of the seat of power that that Puri is, keeping Jagannatha in mind. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you look at the Utkal Khanda of the Mahabharata, the entire land of Udra Desha, again, we are not sure about its contours, so I can't say that it absolutely, coincides with current Orissa. We do not know, because as I said, frontiers were constantly changing. So Udra Desha, the entire land of Udra Desha is an uninterrupted tirth. And this is something, Orias would bring up, that it is a very sacred land, and not just because of Jagannath, although, and that's the interesting thing, it's not just the of power playing out in different ways, but it's an uninterrupted field. Why? Because something that's fallen off the picture completely, Viraja was extremely important. So as you cross the Vaitarani, you had Arka, sun god, again, was completely forgotten. Now, Konark, we just remember Konark. We call it Konarok, it's Konark. Orko, we all know that, the god is the sun god, depending also on the location. So, Konark, then you have Viraja Kshetra, then you have Shaiva Kshetra, and then you have Vaishnava Kshetra. Okay, so Odia, in that sense, Odra Desho is an uninterrupted tirth, because you move from one domain, one sacred domain, to another. And at some stage, it seems, powers were equally divided. These are the mysteries I'm talking about. Who were the kings to whom, Konarka was related? Who built that absolutely gorgeous temple and dedicated it to Surya Dev when? Right? So, and we've forgotten completely that, as people say, that most religions started with, worship of nature in some form or the other.
Konarka temple could not have been completed. It's not finished. It's not a finished artifact.
Yes, but I'm saying that, we don't know whether there was worship at some stage and why it was built. And so we go back to the idea of, all started with the sense of the power of nature over man, and that relationship has changed completely. You go back to history of any religion, even what we call the tribal societies, even more evident. Nature worship in some form. The turtle or the tortoise, the snake. Think of the things we have Nag worship. So sun, Prithvi, of course, earth. So that's common to most. And these are the histories, I don't know whether we can trace, but the point is it has been related to power in some way or the other. How and when is it that we still mention Viraja Kshetra? Nobody goes there. Who goes to the Viraja temple? Someone who's interested in finding out the importance of the Devi, who goes there? Huh? And I get scolded by Kanu when I go to Puri and try and find out more about Vimala Devi, right? It's not just Vimala who's the Odishatri Devi. Around, if you are interested, when you go to Puri, just look around, walk around the Jagannath temple compounds, and there are so many Devis surrounding the temple. So when and why did this, there was this displacement or reshuffling in the divine hierarchy? And it clearly had got a lot to do with the way kingship was ritually constituted. Right? So this is Talala Sat's point, that religion and power in some form or the other have always been together, and that takes me to the point of the separation. He says, so if we are not thinking just of politics, and politics also is a very constructed, limited notion of politics, if we are thinking of religion and power, they have always been combined. And this idea of secular, therefore, is extremely narrow and limited when we separate the church and the state. But I have indicated how this separation of the spiritual domain and the temporal domain happened. And it was clearly there in at least among the Indologists who worked very seriously on early, ancient Hindu thought, because Thomas Troutman calls it the conundrum, absolutely the conundrum of ancient India as to who was superior. Conundrum means it doesn't have a resolution, right? The king or the priest, we do not know. There were constant tussles. So please keep this in mind when we come to discussions about secularism, whether and how far is it a Western concept or not, which is why I don't buy the way it's been taken over. Yes, but several people have pointed out that it doesn't. Separation of church and state does not function in any society, because that is Talal Asad's point, that because of very particular processes in very few societies of Europe at a particular moment of time, this separation had to be made. Right? So that church has changed, the state has changed. So why do we still function with the notion of secularism meaning a separation of church and state? There's no need to function with that, because and that's what I'm pointing to. Even if we look at temples and gods and goddesses here, they are constantly changing, and these changes, one, they obviously are influenced by what the devotees are doing, but the devotees in turn are also being influenced by what is happening later. Right? Why would Kanu otherwise tell me, but Lord Jagannath is so good, even when my Ishta Devi is, some form of Kali, but she's not important. What does he mean when he says she's not important? Right? That she's my Ishta Devi, and yet she cannot give me shelter the way Jagannatha does. So these are, as I said, these readings for me are indicative, and they ask us to think, reflect critically, consider our own assumptions, our own understandings. Do we really know what religion is? Do we really understand what spiritualism is, what we call? And as I said, they're pointing to the problems with these, clear separations, because their meanings have changed. And that's why I gave you the example of Professor Mohan, who's also saying that this idea of spiritual is something adhartic and outside the world is not true at all. And that's why he says religion is also one part of man's reason. So what is this reason which is so separate and so different from the other parts of reason, the divisions that Uberoi is showing, ethics and science, but he's what I find very interesting about Uberoi's reading is, and I agree totally with Vibharat, of course you have to understand him or Vinadas through structuralism. I agree completely, but of course we couldn't bring in all of that, and it would have anyway, in a 6-day course it's also impossible to do. But it's interesting because it's showing the fragmentation that is happening within the same human reasoning, but in relation to man's relation with God and nature. It changes, you see. That is the crucial slip. If initially the arguments were about, you know, Jesus Christ's relation to man and nature, now we have overturned it completely to think of our relationship, right, with the world we live in and with whatever form we think of divinity. Can be Advaita, can be anything, right? So these are, as I said, these are readings that help us to think in different ways, not just in different ways. These, actually for me at least, they push us to reconsider, our own assumptions about what we think we already know. Huh? That's the important point. We all think, we know what religion is. Do we really know what religion is? I don't think we do, because that's what we are fighting about. Why is Ashish Nandi saying religion as faith and religion as ideology? So we cannot really define religion. And as I said, if we call it dharma, a way of life, then why is it that the tolerance is saying that's ingrained in religion as a way of life? Why is it pushing many people to also be very strong supporters of religion as ideology? Right? So what is this religion as faith, which is totally separate from religion as ideology? So for me, these readings, as I said, serve one to understand that why, what is this break we are talking about, when and how. And as I said, the crucial change is with the change of relationship of man to nature, and man now can act upon nature. And two, the second is the secularization of time. As I said, the idea of time not guided by divine command, but also has no normative content. So we can do anything. And it is very interesting for me, which is why I'm saying you all talk about divine affairs. Please try and get hold of my Religion, Law and Power, which is called Tales of Time in Eastern India, where I show how this conception of Mohima Swami as the incarnation, it was so crucial to people's continued belief in Kali Yuga as an era of evil, made particularly potent, let's say, by the devastating famine of Orissa, 1866-67, and several other forces set in motion by, the colonization of Orissa starting from 1803. So it's even for people who are not directly aware of, let's say, the East India Company state, etc., their rhythms of life are getting disrupted. So, when Mohima Swami appears, or when the nationalist struggle is at, let's say, at its peak under Gandhi, especially the non-cooperation movement and his notion, these ideas floating of Gandhi as this Baba who's come to, deliver you of these problems. The idea of these people combined as the avatar who will put an end to this very difficult time, not even necessarily, evil in the classical sense we think of it, but extremely difficult time that will come to an end, and we'll have, it retains its significance, relevance, and it's not just among, as I said, the very poor and the very backward and the very illiterate Vaimatharnis. It has its relevance also among many people, let's say, of Bhubaneswar. Why would Malikas come into circulation after the devastating cyclone of 1999? Yes. So these were the things I was talking about when we say that, these processes of being modern, they are not only fissured, they can never be complete also, because the other thing is, if we think of man as this automated individual with no bonds, that's the idea of the disenchanted man, right? If it had happened, we wouldn't have had any, forget about religion. Why do we need the nation? Why this craving to belong to something, this urge to belong, right? Through which we constantly create identities, through which we constantly create a sense of the collective self. Why the urge to create a collective self when you're meant to stand on your own as a totally disenchanted individual? So, the fallacies of this kind of thinking is, it's not difficult at all to point out. And as I said, we have to think and reflect. And all these readings, what they're doing is just, helping us think, rethink, reconsider, our assumptions, the way we relate to the world, the way we move around in the world. At least the way I see it. And obviously, I'm not saying that all of you have to see it exactly the same way. But now to move to more. Do you want me to speak more about Talal Asad, or I want your comments? Sorry, I digressed a bit, but I've been asked again and again to speak on my own work on Odisha, so that's why I thought I managed to connect, right? Talal Asad, yes. Okay, now your comments on Asad. If there can also be bits that you didn't understand or didn't agree with, and no question is a foolish question. Let's keep that in mind. We are not sitting on judgment here. So please don't feel intimidated. Yes. The other important thing is that what he's saying, that the moment, again linking it with Oberoi, I said that I found close connections. The idea of this symbolic, the inward as separate. What is Talal Asad saying? That the other consequence of this separation, which is not true, but we think it is true, is that we separate the symbolic from actual practices.
Yes.
Which is very important. So the moment we think that the symbolic, takes on its meaning through practice and application, not only do you understand that this separation doesn't hold true, you also understand why they change constantly, because they're taking their very meaning and significance through application, through practices. And which is why I refer to Radhakanta Dev when he said that, why are we going on about scripture, whether sati is, sanctioned by scripture or sati is not sanctioned by scripture. Because what we know as Hindu, none of them are calling Hinduism. And you'd be surprised when I say it's a late 19th century formulation. Bhandarkar, when he's writing in the early 20th century, he's also not using the word Hinduism. Pay attention. That's why I said, something I was told very early on. Be very careful about the language people are using when you are reading any text, any document, anything, anything. He is calling, the Vaishnavas, the Shaivas. He's not using, Hinduism. Maybe the Hindus at times, but never. He doesn't use Hinduism ever.
I had a conceptual problem with this particular because basically there is a baggage. There are some sort of identifiers with any particular ism.
Mm-hmm.
If it is Hinduism, then what are those identifiers? What are those?
But I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm throwing open. That is precisely what I'm trying to throw open. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It is also internal. Yeah.
You internalize it, but it's not an internal construction. You may have internalized it.
I
But
know.
as if you look at the use of vermilion, okay, the use of vermilion.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm just giving an example. A use of vermilion, do we see in terms of religion or not? There is an assumption which always works as is right?
Yeah.
So why symbol cannot be related to this?
No, I'm saying symbol is not something separate with its own separate significance and meaning. Symbol only acquires its meaning and significance through practice. You see, that is Talal Asad's point, that the moment we say, that is the problem of thinking of religion as something separate with its own essence. And so he's saying, what is this essence that we think we can capture through the point he is raising? So what then is Hinduism, which has had an essence through centuries? We can't pinpoint.
Commonalities.
Yes.
With which it will be easy for us to identify, like with any particular reason. Say, for example, we know what is socialism or what is Marxism. Some definite principles, which makes us things easier to identify the notion, what Marxism is actually constituted of. But then my problem is that Hinduism does not have these essential markers
Exactly.
or conceptual ideas, which would be for me, because it's as diverse as anything.
So that is precisely the point. I think that is what Aranatha Dev is saying, that when we
make sense, not for us to practicing, changing it by living it.
yes, so when we say, right, that's the point. Aranatha Dev was saying that why are we accepting the idea that we have to find the basis of Hinduism only in scriptures when that is not true? When practices form an equally, if not more important part of what is Hindu, not Hinduism, not Hinduism, even the early 19th century. So these are the questions I'm raising, and that's precisely what Talal Asad is pointing to, that the symbolic does not stand on its own above, and therefore the symbolic is not something we naturally understand. That is what Clifford Geertz is saying, that this generates in us certain dispositions. So he's saying, but if symbols themselves are molded by practices, so then is it the disposition that impacts on the symbol? Or is it the symbol that, produces certain dispositions? So these are the, dualisms and binaries and problems he finds with Geertz's formulation of, or attempt to formulate, religion and universal definition of it. And there are not easy answers. There can't be. That's why I'm saying we have to. I'm glad you're bringing up these questions, because these are precisely the points we have to, ponder upon ourselves. And if we did, as I said, hopefully we will try and think of and relate to the world in a different way.
One of the replies that I got is that, like, with all other Semitic religions, so there are some set of guidelines or principles which are attached with all other most of these Semitic religions. These are the sets of do's and these are the sets of don'ts. You do this in order to be practicing this or practicing that. You don't do this in order to be recognized as a practicing this person of this particular religion. So there are a set of do's and
But
don'ts.
that also has not remained unchanged. That's precisely what Talal Asad is saying,
Yes.
that even for religions of what you call the Semitic religion, or the religions of the book, right? Religions of the book, they have not remained the same. They have constantly, got changed and, transformed through practices, and that is why it says that what it meant probably to be a Christian in let's say the 15th century or 16th century is very different from the way even a believing Christian thinks he is a believing Christian. It's the same thing. That's why I said I cannot say with authority that I can even say that the way my father believed in being a Hindu as a way of life is the same I do, right? Even within a generation. See, these are precisely the problems of essentializing anything. These are precisely the problems. And I'm glad that you're saying it. And the other important thing, I think it's Ubinoy or Asad, I'm forgetting, one of them says that precisely when we change, when these debates happen and the other things, when we make this break, the word is replaced by the world. Very interesting. And now we have command over the world because it's no longer God's word. Which is why I began by saying that even when we are believing Hindus, when we think, act everyday lives, we do not think that we are working under the command of God. So that has somehow seeped in very different ways, but all over. Yes.
Ma'am,
Yes, please.
as ma'am was saying that we are not sure whether there is something called Hinduism. So, just a layman, I mean, just out of curiosity, I'm asking, say, since we were born, say whatever things we were doing, say I must to fill up a form. So my state permits me to fill up certain things, no? Your religion. But we have always identified, why did we identify, we don't know, but we selected, say, Hinduism, someone is a Muslim, Christianity. So according to her, this Hinduism is a kind of external construction that she's saying. And she also says that it actually does not exist in a way. I don't know how she understands actually. And then please, and do you agree that say Christianity in India exists? I just wanted to know whether Christianity exists, and if it exists, on what basis we are agreeing that Christianity exists. Say they have a Bible, they have certain rituals, and they have churches relating to this, and Hinduism, on the other hand, does not exist.
No.
On what basis we are deciding that some religion exists and some others don't? I mean, if
I think what I was trying to.
Yeah, I was just trying
Yeah,
to.
you have to understand Hinduism in the sense of, first of all, you have to understand how do you define and distinguish between different religious groups, practices, and sets of beliefs. Now, Hinduism does, unlike the Semitic religions, does not have a church, a body of beliefs and systems which is fixed forever. It's a very dynamic. You have so many Karoro Devi Devatas. It's the religion of the book, unlike you have in, let's say, Islam or in Christianity. So it is, this ism has been given to us by ideological imposition on what is Hinduism as a set of practices. You've had so many debates in what is Hindu Dharma.
No, I don't think we
I simply don't. No. You have so many different practices, traditions, rivalries between different gurus. So it is not a set of codified belief and practices.
Sorry.
It's not the religion of the book.
No, it doesn't.
It is not a religion of the book.
No, I was just trying to, just a simple thing.
No.
Every religion has two parts. No, people practice it, people believe it, and if I think of religion as a story, it relates to certain spaces. I have church as a religious space.
We have temples, so I don't agree with the thing that we have nothing and we are, brilliant.
Religious sects and beliefs and rituals, and nobody is saying that you put up this one up in or something, or you read Gita. It's nobody's externally actually imposing on this. What I'm trying to know is that, say, I don't understand theory and I'm not an intelligent person. But from birth, I identify with something. When somebody asks me to write, what's your religion? Hinduism. Now, if I were to understand that, why do I call myself a Hindu?
I think you have to ask yourself those questions.
No,
absolutely, that's the point.
Somebody asks me, if somebody says that, no, you cannot say because there is no Hinduism at all. Now, if there is no Hinduism, how do you actually agree upon the fact that there is Christianity?
No, there's a Hindu way of life, but that doesn't mean that it has to be Hinduism. I think we are mixing two things. First, as I said, Semitic religions have maybe a book, but again, what I'm trying to, I think we've missed the point of the readings. Yes, Shantali.
Yes, I think what she was trying to say that Hinduism is not an organized religion the way Christianity or Islam.
But that's our understanding of Christianity and Islam.
Hinduism
Yes.
is a different religion.
But then you'll have to define what Hinduism is. Now, Hinduism is not a monolithic religion the way Christianity is.
It's not. Neither Christianity nor Islam are monolithic. I think we have to start from there. I think it's our construction. It's our construction of Islam and Christianity, and we have to be extremely careful there. Now, to answer your question, one, we were speaking of the of the influence, the the very long-lasting repercussions of the way we have been classified, categorized, and defined and fossilized. Okay, I had an ongoing debate with a colleague of mine, very respected scholar. He said any modern state classifies and categorizes, which is true. I said, but if it hadn't been the British colonial state and some form of centralized Indian state that was ruling, would it have colonized, not colonized, classified and categorized and defined us in exactly the same ways? And maybe when you spoke of colonization, that's what I'm saying. Why is it that it was not important for the Mughal state to, find out all these, because these were not our priorities. The colonial state, once it becomes openly colonial, consciously colonial, much before when Victoria takes over, it was by the early 19th century. The East India Company has, conquered a very large part of territory. Not only that, it has also amassed such a huge debt that its monopoly to, trade with India and the, East, it's completely, cannot be justified on any grounds. It had a monopoly, remember? And it loses the monopoly with China after the renewal of Chapter, etc., etc. So, the point is, they come with certain notions of Indian society. So, when they set out to classify and categorize and define, they impose those their understandings of Indian society on us. And the point is, within like 20 years, because the censuses are constantly asking you, what's your religion, what's your caste, what's this, what's that, we get kind of used to answering those questions. If you're not internal, you know that these questions will be answered. So I'll take you back there. Why is it? My question would be, even after so much critiquing of colonial categories, why do we still have to fill out forms where we have to mention, right, our religion, our caste, our background, etc., right? So there it is partly all our social conditioning. We always say we are born a Hindu or born a Muslim, and the people, if we expand the ideas of individual choice or being secular or being democratic, these are the larger questions being raised. Do we have a choice? Don't we have a choice?
We have a choice. I'd like to introduce. The most sophisticated of them, they will still keep a box wherein you can tick if you do not want to identify yourself belonging to any particular religion. This is number one. The practice of categorization and make compartmentalization of this particular subject space, which the Britishers were trying to come in terms to, it must have started with those Asiatic societies and William Jones, who the Indologist. So they have started this practice. Responding to what as much as I could gather, I'm not very sure whether I could understand this. Hinduism, I have a lot of problem with the term, as I have already mentioned. It's a particular external marker to describe or define a particular group of people in which there is a great diversity.
Exactly.
In fact, the word that has been used for some certain point of time but went out of fashion is Sanatan. Sanatan, a kind of a group of people who are there from the very beginning, from time immemorial, but then who are diverse, whose religious practices sometimes are completely very different from one another. Say, I know people belonging to this particular religion to which I subscribe. There is a practice of sacrifice, sacrificial rituals, to which other sections violently oppose. So, Hinduism, which again I'm insisting is a problematic term, we may have, but then I will go with Eva as much as I could understand what she was trying to do. That it is an external imposition to define a category of people, possibly from outside. Not that we told the world outside that we are Hindus. Rather than the world came, and then when they asked the question, the external agency came, and then when they wanted to identify us, they said, this is Christian, this is Muslim, this is Hindu.
Exactly. Yes. But the other thing is, I think we are committing the same problem of saying that we know what Islam and Christianity are when we don't. Both of them are extremely diverse, and what we are pointing to is precisely from the early phase when you have debates, discussions. We don't have to go into just the division we all know of the Shias and the Sunnis, the Sufis. And Islam in India has spread through the Sufis. When I was speaking of, some symbols that people, when that Hindu way of life or Hindu practices, they're rich in iconography. Islam doesn't have. They're the music. Think of our bhajans, the sense of convening a collective identity, or this idea of getting immersed, while, thinking of God or Lord, a Lord which you cannot conceive. The same problem with Mahima Dharmis. You say, these people say he is the Alek, he's Alek, and he is Mahima, but it's very
incomprehensible.
Absolutely. He's Alek because he cannot be written about. He's indescribable, because the moment you write about him, you are binding him. Very much, So the problem is, but they have also gone in for certain rituals. Right, which is, they say that is not meant for anything. They light the lamp because you try and dispel darkness for light and the general well-being of the world. That's what they're praying for, or that this absolutely supreme Alek should come to as be the protector of everyone. But I'm saying symbols, and hence Sufism is important. But think of the problems the Sufis have had with the ulama all along. So please do not comment, what is my point? That when the British come, and Ashish Nandy has said it, and others also have gone brilliantly, as to how Indian society gets objectified, becomes objectified as an object of study, and how, Indians are reacting in ways they had never thought of before, because no one had put those questions to them ever. So when I speak of the enduring repercussions, but that's what I'm saying, within the 20 years, we have become smarter, we know the answer. Look at the Consensus Commissioner's reports, like the people who are actually going and doing the service, not even the commissioners, the ones who are moving from door to door, asking this. These Indians, they're just, totally out of control. They don't even know their religion, they don't even know their caste. Some are giving their profession, some are...
that point, and
yes.
that's so very interesting.
It is so very interesting. By the time of the third census, we know that somehow we have to answer. And we are identifying. And now how much time has passed? If this is happening within 20 years, so these are, what I'm trying to say. It is, it has to start somewhere. Our reflection, our questioning, and which is the, the everyday, as we say, Gatanugotik. Why should we, just because we think we were born a Hindu, I can be a totally believing Hindu. My father was. Right? Totally. He would never, start eating without offering the food to his ancestors. Yes. So, but I'm saying we have to ask those questions. And there's a great problem if you say we know who a Christian is or who a Muslim is, because that is what Talal Asad is pointing to. That it is through, it is through your understanding, it is through your practice that this idea of faith acquires meaning and significance. Okay, so even if there is a book, who is following? Sora works on the catechists in central India. Just read those accounts of how they're explaining the truth of Christ to the people around. Changed completely, which is why am I insisting on the the vernacularization and domestication in precisely these terms, because we understand it through through ideas, through notions, through our own socialization, things we can fall back upon. It's impossible to understand something totally different or new, or something we have not faced before. So how do you do it? And Bernard Konsing said beautifully that this is an almost an unconscious process of translation that happens always. And he's saying that, when we say that the Britishers did this, that, what also they were doing, and not all of it was with terrible intent, they were doing the same thing. They are seeing something which they don't understand. So how will they understand it? They try and understand it by relating to something that they know and they think they understand. And through that, obviously, the meanings are significant. That's why I gave you the example of the Darbar. Where it was incorporation, and hence it was clearly marked. You put the viceroy in the middle so that you show British neutrality. But even when they are thinking that they are evoking or recreating a very, what they thought was a Mughal ritual. You see, these are the questions. Precisely, I'm sorry, I think we're taking time. We have to stop here. Ashish Nandi, very quickly, because I have shown said, pointed to my problems. 5 minutes, someone just, because we'll come back to Ashish Nandi tomorrow, in any case. So, tomorrow? Okay. Yes? Yes? Okay. Thank you then. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Sorry, there's just one question, one last question. And the other thing is, it does not have to be on different ways of imagining the nation. It will be debate and discussion tomorrow, and I want your feedback. I'll speak very little. I'll probably just, maybe respond to some of your comments. Yes.
That's not a question, it just has an observation. Like when you said the spiritual is not adhyatmic only, it's also worldly. So in Islam also, like we have children,
Take the microphone, please, because yes.
When you say that spiritual is not only adhyatmic, it is also worldly. So in Islam also, although it's not right here, but then in Islam also, like a single good deed, like you can say a smile to someone, is also regarded as a spiritual. So because worldly things like when you become spiritual, you follow certain norms like celibacy.
Yes.
But in Islam, the celibacy is totally you cannot opt for that. So in that case, spirituality is also good deeds are also regarded as spiritual.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. So
and again, when you said the practices of we can understand through practice also we can understand faith. So in that sense also, Muslims in Islam we have lot of division. Like when we said that Islam only has one God.
Absolutely.
But like Wahhabis that
Absolutely.
and the Shias following the Ahlul Bayt. So there are so many divisions. They say that Wahhabis say that the Prophet is already dead, but the Ahlul Sunnah said that no, it is not. He's still alive.
Yes.
So in that sense, it's very.
Yes, I want all of you to speak tomorrow. Please come up for the service. Yes, and the other thing is, no, I said the different ways of imagining the nation, but it can be anything that has moved you of the readings. Okay? I'm just terrified of this. The other request is, please, if some of you can finish and send your abstracts, then we can start, reading them. I know this 300 and I have to also prepare for class tomorrow, and then decide on and because he has to prepare whatever grade cards. I mean, for me it's absurd, but since it's
Yeah, 27th midday.
If you want us to stay up all night, and then I have to sit together with Abhishek through the night.
She asked me, A would be able to actually let's verify.
So if you can start, and today, some of you can do it. And